They prayed for a sign in the middle of the worst storm they'd seen in years. And then came the knock at the door. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why would her arrival test the very limits of what they believed was right? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. Asterisk. The wind howled across the barren plains of Arizona Territory, 1878, rattling the wooden shutters of the modest homestead that Martha and Thomas Miller had built with their own hands 3 years prior. Rain pelted against the roof, an uncommon blessing in this unforgiving land that had taken far more from them than it had given. Martha stood by the window, her calloused hands gripping a worn quilt around her shoulders. At 34, the lines on her face told stories of hardship and loss. 4 miscarriages had left her spirit as weathered as the land outside. She watched as Thomas struggled to secure the livestock in the barn, his tall frame hunched against the driving rain. "Lord above," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass, "we've asked for so little and endured so much. Just give us a sign that we haven't been forsaken out here." When Thomas finally burst through the door, water cascading from his hat and coat, Martha had already stoked the fire and set a pot of coffee to boil on the cast-iron stove. "Storm's getting worse," he said, hanging his dripping coat on a peg by the door. "Richardson's Creek might flood if this keeps up." Martha nodded, absently, her thoughts elsewhere. "I was just thinking about what Reverend Miller said last Sunday, about faith being tested." Thomas's expression softened as he crossed the room and placed his rough hands on her shoulders. At 40, his face was weathered from years working under the merciless sun, yet his eyes still held the kindness that had made her fall in love with him back in Missouri. "Our faith's been tested plenty, Martha. Sometimes I wonder if we've been tested more than Job himself." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know, Thomas. But I can't help feeling that there's a purpose to all this. That maybe." A sharp knock at the door cut her off. They froze, exchanging puzzled glances. Visitors were rare in fair weather, let alone during a storm like this. Who in tarnation would be out in this? Thomas muttered, reaching for the rifle that hung above the fireplace. More out of habit than fear. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. Martha moved toward the door, but Thomas gently pulled her back. "Let me," he said, setting the rifle aside but keeping it within reach. When he opened the door, the howling wind nearly tore it from his grasp. At first, he saw nothing but darkness and rain. Then his eyes dropped lower, and he found himself staring at a small figure huddled against the doorframe. It was a child, a girl no more than 7 or 8 years old. Her black hair hung in wet ropes around a face smudged with dirt and tears. Her simple dress was soaked through, and she trembled violently from cold and fear. But what struck Thomas most were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and unmistakably Apache. "Good Lord," he breathed, immediately kneeling down. "Martha, come quick." Martha was already there, gasping at the sight of the shivering child. Without hesitation, she reached out and drew the girl inside, maternal instincts overwhelming any questions about where she had come from or why. "You poor thing," Martha murmured, wrapping her quilt around the child's shoulders. "You're soaked to the bone." The girl said nothing, watching them with wary eyes as water pooled beneath her bare feet on the wooden floor. "Can you understand me?" Thomas asked gently. "Do you speak English?" The girl gave a barely perceptible nod, then whispered something so softly that Martha had to lean closer. "What was that, child?" "Najoni," the girl said, a little louder this time, placing a hand against her chest. "My name is Najoni." "Martha." And Thomas exchanged a look, a complex mixture of concern, confusion, and something else, something that neither had dared feel for a long time, hope. "Well, Najoni," Martha said, leading the child toward the fire, "let's get you warm and dry. Then you can tell us how you came to be at our door on such a terrible night." As Martha busied herself finding dry clothes for the girl, Thomas stood by the window, staring out at the relentless storm. Just moments ago, they had been questioning their faith, asking for a sign. And now, this child and Apache girl, no less, had appeared on their doorstep like an answer to a prayer. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways," Thomas murmured to himself, watching as Martha gently dried Najoni's hair with a towel, the tenderness in her movements bringing a lump to his throat. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the Miller homestead, something long dormant had begun to stir, a fragile, tentative feeling that perhaps their years of loss and longing had been leading to this moment all along. The morning sun streamed through the curtains as Martha stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. She glanced toward the small cot in the corner where Najoni slept peacefully, wrapped in Martha's childhood quilt. The girl had said little the previous night, exhaustion claiming her shortly after she'd eaten a bowl of stew and changed into one of Martha's old nightgowns, comically large on her small frame. Thomas entered from outside, boots caked with mud, from checking the damage to their small farm after the storm. "How is she?" he asked quietly, washing his hands in the basin. "Still sleeping," Martha replied, her voice equally soft. "Thomas, what are we going to do? She must belong somewhere, to someone." Thomas's face grew serious as he dried his hands on a towel. There was Apache trouble near Socorro last month. Army drove them further west. Could be she got separated during the fighting. Martha frowned, her heart aching at the thought. "She's just a child." "I know," Thomas sighed. "When she wakes, maybe she can tell us more. Meanwhile, I'll ride to town later, see if anyone's heard anything about missing children." The floorboards creaked, and they turned to see Najoni standing beside the cot, watching them with those penetrating dark eyes. Martha's nightgown hung off her small shoulders like a tent. "Good morning, Najoni," Martha said warmly. "Are you hungry?" "I've made oatmeal." The girl nodded tentatively, approaching the table with cautious steps. Martha served her a bowl, adding a spoonful of precious honey they saved for special occasions. "Can you tell us what happened to you?" Thomas asked gently once she'd eaten a few bites. "How did you find yourself at our door last night?" Najoni stared into her bowl for a long moment before speaking. "Soldiers came," she said finally, her English halting but clear. "My mother told me to run, to hide. I ran for days." Her small fingers gripped the spoon tightly. "I saw your light." Martha and Thomas exchanged pained glances. The simplicity of her words only amplified the tragedy they contained. "Your mother," Martha began carefully, "and your father? Do you know where they are now?" Najoni's face remained remarkably composed, but her eyes filled with tears. "Gone, all gone. The soldiers took them." Martha moved to the girl's side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, child." Thomas cleared his throat, visibly affected. "I'll still ride to town, but ... He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what army relocation of Apache tribes often meant. "You're safe here with us for now," Martha assured her, though uncertainty clouded her eyes as she looked to Thomas. What would happen if they found relatives searching for her? Or worse, what if officials demanded they turn her over? Later that morning, as Thomas prepared to ride to Junction City, their nearest town, Martha pulled him aside by the barn. "Thomas, I know what you're thinking," she said, clutching his sleeve. "I'm thinking it too," he nodded solemnly. "It ain't right to get our hopes up, Martha. This child has family somewhere, even if it's not her parents. And even if she DOESN single quotes T dot double coots," he sighed heavily. "Folks around here might not take kindly to his harboring an Apache girl. Since when have we cared what others think?" Martha's voice took on a steel edge he hadn't heard in years. "All I know is that child came to us in the middle of a storm. She has nowhere else to go right now. And I..." She faltered, then continued more softly. "I felt something last night, Thomas." When I was combing her hair before bed. Like maybe all our prayers weren't for nothing. Thomas looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw a spark in her eyes that had been missing for too long. He cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. I felt it too, he admitted. But let's tread carefully. I'll inquire in town, see what I can learn. Meanwhile, you two get acquainted. See if she opens up more about where she's from. After Thomas departed, Martha found Najoni sitting on the porch steps, watching a pair of meadowlarks in the yard. The girl had changed into some old clothes Martha had altered hastily that morning. A simple skirt and blouse that had once belonged to the daughter of a neighbor who'd moved on west. Would you like to help me in the garden? Martha asked. The rain has made the soil just right for planting. Najoni nodded, following Martha to the vegetable patch behind the house. To Martha's surprise, the girl needed little instruction. Her small hands worked deftly, creating perfect rows for the bean seeds. You've done this before, Martha observed. With my grandmother, Najoni replied. She taught me plants. Which to eat, which to heal. Is that so? Martha smiled. Perhaps. You could teach me sometime. As they worked side by side under the warming sun, Martha felt a strange peace settle over her. She began to hum an old hymn, one her mother had sung while gardening. After a while, she noticed Najoni watching her intently. It's just an old song, Martha explained. My mother taught it to me. It's pretty, Najoni said simply. Would you like to learn it? The girl nodded, and Martha began singing softly, line by line, with Najoni repeating after her. Their voices, one weathered by years of hardship, the other bright with youth, despite all it had witnessed, blended in the clear morning air. Neither noticed Thomas returning until his shadow fell across the garden. Martha looked up instantly, reading the complex emotions on her husband's face. I need to speak with you, he said quietly. Martha's heart clenched as she stood, brushing soil from her hands. Najoni, why don't you keep planting those beans while I talk to Mr. Miller? The girl nodded, but her eyes darted between them, seeming to understand more than they realized. Around the corner of the house, Thomas removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. There's been no word of any Apache child gone missing, he said. But there was a skirmish 3 weeks back, about 20 miles west in the foothills. Army versus a small band of Apache who'd escaped the reservation. And, Martha prompted, dreading his next words. No survivors reported, Martha. They said everyone was either captured or killed. No mention of a child escaping. He ran a hand through his hair. I spoke with Sheriff Davies. He says if she's truly orphaned, they'll likely send her to that mission school down in Tucson. Martha's face hardened. Those places ... they're not schools, Thomas. They're prisons for children. They strip away everything, their language, their beliefs, even their names. I know, Thomas said heavily. Davies gave me 2 weeks to sort it out, before he's obliged to report it to the Indian Agency. 2 weeks, Martha repeated, her mind racing. What are we going to do? Thomas looked back toward the garden, where Najoni's small figure bent over the rows of freshly turned earth. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know that little girl didn't stumble onto our doorstep by accident. Maybe it's the sign we asked for, maybe it isn't. Either way, we've got 2 weeks to figure it out. Martha followed his gaze, watching as Najoni carefully covered each seed with soil, her movements deliberate and focused. Something was taking root here, not just in their garden, but in their hearts as well. And Martha knew, with sudden clarity, that she would do whatever it took to protect this unexpected gift that had arrived with the storm. 1 week had passed since Najoni had appeared at their door. The Miller homestead had transformed in subtle ways, colorful stones arranged on the windowsill, wild flowers in tin cans on the table, and most noticeably, the sound of a child's laughter occasionally breaking the familiar silence. Thomas sat on the porch, mending a bridle as he watched Martha and Najoni hang laundry on the line. The girl was becoming less guarded, her smiles coming more readily now. She followed Martha everywhere, absorbing every household task with keen interest. "She's a quick study," Thomas remarked later as he and Martha sat at the kitchen table after Najoni had gone to bed. "Smarter than most grown folks I know." Martha nodded, her fingers busy with darning a small pair of socks she'd fashioned from one of her old woolen shawls. "She knows all sorts of things about plants and animals. Yesterday she showed me how to use yucca root for soap. Can you imagine?" Thomas watched his wife's animated expression, a warmth spreading through his chest. The change in Martha was remarkable. Her eyes brighter, her movements more purposeful. For the first time in years, she seemed fully alive. "We've got 1 week left before Davies expects an answer," he said quietly. Hating to dampen her spirits, Martha's hands stilled. "I know. Reverend Wilson came by the Mercantile today while I was there. Asked if we'd be bringing our guest to Sunday service tomorrow." Martha's eyes flashed. "And what did you tell him?" "Said we'd be there, all 3 of us." Thomas leaned forward. "Martha, we can't hide her away. People already know she's here. Better to face them head on than give them reason to gossip more than they already are." Martha sighed, knowing he was right. "What about afterward? Have you given any thought to what we should do?" Thomas was silent for a long moment. "I have," he finally said. "Been thinking on it constantly." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Remember how we used to talk about moving further west? To California, maybe?" Martha's eyes widened. "You can't possibly mean, why not?" Thomas's voice grew earnest. "We've got some savings. Enough to sell this place, buy a wagon and supplies. California's different, not so many prejudices against who people are or where they come from. Leave everything we've built here? Just pack up and go." "What have we really built, Martha?" Thomas asked gently. "A hardscrabble farm that barely yields enough to keep us fed. Neighbors who tolerate us but never quite accepted us because we weren't born here. What's really keeping us?" Martha gazed around their modest home, the home they had scraped and saved to build, where they had weathered storms both literal and figurative. Yet she knew the answer before she spoke it. "Nothing," she whispered. "Not anymore. We could give her a chance. Martha, give ourselves one too." Martha squeezed his hand, tears welling in her eyes. "Let's see how tomorrow goes first. How people react at church." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Martha dressed Najoni in a simple blue dress she'd hastily sewn from one of her old skirts, and braided the girl's long black hair with a ribbon. "You look beautiful," Martha told her, fighting back unexpected tears. Najoni touched the ribbon tentatively. "Why do people go to this church?" "To worship God," Martha explained. "To pray and sing together," the girl nodded thoughtfully. "My people pray too, but not in houses." Thomas appeared in the doorway, dressed in his Sunday best. "Time to go, ladies. Don't want to be late for Reverend Wilson's sermon." The journey to Junction City's small white church was tense with anticipation. As their wagon approached, Martha could see people gathered outside, their conversation stopping abruptly as they noticed the Millers and their unexpected companion. Thomas helped Martha and Najoni down from the wagon, his jaw set in determination as he nodded politely to the onlookers. "Morning, folks." A few mumbled greetings in return, while others simply stared. Reverend Wilson approached, his expression unreadable beneath his bushy beard. "Thomas, Martha," he said, then looked down at Najoni. "And this must be the young lady I've heard about." "This is Najoni," Martha said firmly, her hand protective on the girl's shoulder. "She's staying with us for now." Reverend Wilson studied the child for a moment before his face softened slightly. "Well, all God's children are welcome in his house. Shall we go in?" They followed him inside, acutely aware of the whispers behind them. Martha guided Najoni to a pew near the back, positioning herself between the girl and the aisle as if to shield her from prying eyes. The service began with a hymn, the familiar melody filling the small church. To Martha's surprise, Najoni began to sing softly beside her, the very hymn Martha had taught her in the garden. A few heads turned at the sound of the child's voice, clear and sweet among the congregation. Mrs. Abernathy, the butcher's wife, who sat across the aisle, leaned toward her husband, whispering something that made him frown disapprovingly. When Reverend Wilson began his sermon, Martha tensed, expecting fire and brimstone. Instead, he spoke of the Good Samaritan, of helping strangers in need regardless of where they came from. Martha couldn't help wondering if he had chosen the topic specifically for today. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The Reverend quoted, "The one who had mercy on him," Jesus told him. "Go and do likewise." Throughout the service, Martha felt the weight of stares upon them, some curious, others openly hostile. Sheriff Davies was there too, his calculating gaze occasionally drifting to Najoni. Martha pulled the girl closer. After the final hymn, as people filed out of the church, Thomas placed a hand on Martha's back, guiding her and Najoni toward the door. They almost made it outside when Mrs. Abernathy stepped directly into their path. "Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice carrying enough to ensure others would hear, "I must say, it's quite Christian of you to take in such a child. Though I wonder if you've considered the implications." Martha felt Thomas stiffen beside her. "What implications might those be, Mrs. Abernathy?" she asked coolly. "Well," the woman continued, adjusting her hat with practiced indignation, "there are those whose families have suffered terribly at the hands of her kind. My own brother-in-law lost his farm in the raids 3 years ago. This child has lost far more than a farm," Martha replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "She's lost her entire family. And how do you know what she tells you is true?" Mrs. Abernathy pressed. "These people are known for their—" "That's enough, Eleanor," Reverend Wilson interrupted, appearing beside them. "I believe we just spent an hour discussing who our neighbors are. Perhaps we should practice what we preach." Mrs. Abernathy's mouth snapped shut, though her eyes still blazed with disapproval. "Thank you, Reverend," Thomas said quietly. The minister nodded, then bent slightly to address Najoni. "You have a lovely singing voice, young lady. I hope to hear it again next Sunday." Najoni, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, looked up at him with those solemn dark eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. As they walked back to their wagon, Sheriff Davies approached, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Millers," he acknowledged. "Been giving any thought to our conversation, Thomas?" "We have," Thomas replied carefully. "And we'll have an answer for you by the end of the week." Davies nodded, his gaze lingering on Najoni. "See that you do. Indian agent will be passing through on Friday. He'll want to know about her." The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they crested the hill that overlooked their small homestead, Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop. "What do you think, Martha?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the creak of the wagon and the gentle breeze. "About what I suggested last night?" Martha looked down at Najoni, who had fallen asleep against her side, exhausted from the tension of the morning. The child's face was peaceful in sleep, trustingly pressed against Martha's arm. "How soon can we leave?" she asked, her decision made. Thomas's face broke into a smile, the first genuine one she'd seen in years. "I can start making arrangements tomorrow. If we move quickly, we could be gone before that Indian agent arrives on Friday." Martha nodded, gazing out at the horizon beyond their small farm. Somewhere out there lay California and a fresh start for all of them. "Then that's what we'll do," she said firmly. "We'll go west." Dawn had barely broken when Thomas hitched the horses to their newly purchased wagon. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of activity, selling their livestock, packing essential belongings, and quietly making arrangements to sell their homestead to the Johnsons, a young couple eager to start farming. Martha moved efficiently around the cabin, wrapping their few precious items in quilts and linens. Najoni followed, carefully placing each bundle in the wooden crate Thomas had built. "Will people be angry that we're leaving?" Najoni asked suddenly, her perceptiveness catching Martha off guard. Martha paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some might be, but sometimes doing what's right means making difficult choices. Because of me?" The girl's voice was small but direct. Martha knelt before her, taking Najoni's hands in her own. "Because of all of us. Because we need a fresh start. Somewhere we can be a family without others telling us we shouldn't." Najoni considered this, then nodded solemnly. "My grandmother said that sometimes the wind must carry seeds far from home so they can grow strong in new soil." Martha's eyes misted. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. I wish I could have known her." "She would have liked you," Najoni said with simple certainty. By midday, the wagon was loaded. Thomas had constructed a false bottom in one section, creating a hiding place should they encounter trouble on the road. Martha hoped they wouldn't need it, but the precaution brought some comfort. "Almost ready," Thomas announced, securing the last of their supplies. "Just need to pick up our money from the bank in town. We'll leave as soon as I return." Martha nodded, anxiety creasing her brow. "Be careful, Thomas, if anyone suspects." "I'll say we're visiting my cousin in Santa Fe," he assured her. "Davies isn't due back until tomorrow, and the Indian agent won't arrive until Friday. No one will know otherwise until we're well on our way." After Thomas departed, Martha and Najoni continued preparing for the journey. Martha baked journey bread while Najoni filled water barrels from the well. The domesticity of these tasks belied the magnitude of what they were about to undertake. "Martha," Najoni called from the porch. "Riders coming." Martha's heart lurched as she rushed outside. 3 horsemen approached from the direction of town, and Thomas wasn't among them. She recognized Sheriff Davies immediately, his distinctive hat visible even at a distance. "Inside, quickly," Martha urged, guiding Najoni into the house. "If anyone asks, you're helping me pack for a visit to relatives, nothing more." The girl nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. Martha smoothed her apron and stepped onto the porch just as the riders reached the yard. Beside Davies rode Mr. Abernathy and another man she didn't recognize, likely the Indian agent. "Arrived earlier than expected." "Afternoon, Mrs. Miller," Davies called, dismounting. "Hope we're not intruding." "Not at all, Sheriff," Martha replied, striving to keep her voice steady. "Though I'm afraid my husband isn't here at present." "So we gathered," Davies said. "Saw him in town not 30 minutes ago. That's partly why we're here." The unknown man stepped forward, his government issue, uniform and stern expression confirming Martha's fears. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Peterson with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I understand you're harboring an Apache child." Martha's hands tightened on her apron. "We've taken in an orphaned girl, yes. She came to us during the storm last week." "Well, that's mighty charitable," Peterson said, his tone suggesting otherwise. "However, regulations require that all Indian children without guardians be remanded to the appropriate facilities. I've come to collect her." Martha stood straighter. "She has guardians." "My husband and myself," Peterson smiled thinly. "With all due respect, ma'am, you have no legal claim to the child. Now, if you'd be so kind as to fetch her, we can conclude this business quickly." Martha glanced at Davies, searching for any sign of sympathy. "Sheriff, you said we had until Friday." Davies at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That was before Agent Peterson arrived early, ma'am. And before your husband was seen withdrawing all your money from the bank and purchasing a wagon." He sighed. "Mrs. Abernathy noticed and brought it to my attention. Of course she had." Martha's mind raced, calculating how long before Thomas would return. 20 minutes? 30. Too long. "The child, Mrs. Miller," Peterson repeated, his patience visibly thinning. I have authorization to search these premises if necessary." "There's no need for that," Martha said, her voice surprisingly calm despite her thundering heart. "She's inside. Let me speak with her first. Prepare her." Peterson nodded curtly. 5 minutes. Martha retreated inside, closing the door behind her. Najoni stood in the middle of the room, her small face set in determined lines. "I heard," she said simply. Martha knelt before her, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me carefully, Najoni. When Thomas returns, we're still leaving. But right. Now I need you to hide." She led the girl to the root cellar, accessible through a trapdoor beneath the kitchen table. "Stay here, no matter what you hear. Don't come out until either Thomas or I call for you. Do you understand?" Najoni nodded, her dark eyes shining with unshed tears. "What will happen to you?" Martha forced a smile. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." She pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead. "Now go, quickly." After securing the trapdoor and pushing the table back into place, Martha took a deep breath and returned to the porch. "She's gathering her things," she told the men. "She's understandably frightened." Peterson checked his pocket watch impatiently. "Mrs. Miller, my time is valuable." "So is a child's life, Mr. Peterson," Martha retorted, her patience fraying. "Just..." Then, the sound of an approaching wagon caught their attention. Thomas appeared around the bend in the road, his expression darkening as he took in the scene before their home. He pulled the horses to a stop, his movements deliberately calm as he climbed down. "Gentlemen," he greeted, coming to stand beside. "Martha, to what do we owe this visit?" Peterson stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, I'm here for the Apache child." "Your wife seems reluctant to cooperate." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That's because the child isn't going anywhere." "The law says otherwise," Peterson countered. "What law would that be?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The one that says it's right to tear children from their homes, to force them to forget who they are. That law?" Davy shifted uncomfortably. "Thomas, don't make this harder than it needs to be. The decision isn't ours to make." "No," Thomas agreed. "It's not yours. It's ours." He looked at Martha, a silent understanding passing between them. "We're that child's family now, the only one she has left." Peterson's face reddened. "This is absurd." "Sheriff, I insist you do your duty." Before Davies could respond, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Reverend Wilson rode into the yard, followed by several members of the church congregation, including, surprisingly, Mrs. Abernathy's husband. "What's all this, then?" the Reverend called, dismounting with surprising agility for a man of his age. "Church business, Reverend," Davies replied uneasily. "Best you folks head back to town." "I believe this is precisely church business," Wilson countered, approaching the group. "When I heard what was happening, I thought perhaps a reminder of Christian charity might be in order." Mrs. Johnson, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "We came to help the Millers, Sheriff. They've sold their farm to us, fair and square. We're here to see them off properly." Martha stared in astonishment. Thomas squeezed her hand, equally surprised by this unexpected show of support. "Reverend." Wilson addressed Peterson directly. "Sir, I understand you have a duty to perform, but I ask you to consider that sometimes a higher law must prevail. These good people have opened their hearts and home to a child in desperate need. The regulations are clear," Peterson insisted, though with less conviction than before. "Regulations," Mr. Abernathy scoffed, surprising everyone. "My wife may have her opinions, but I've seen firsthand what happens to children in those schools. No child deserves that." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Davies finally sighed heavily. "Look, Peterson, I think we need to reconsider. These are good folks, respected in the community." He gestured to the gathered townspeople, "as you can see." Peterson looked from face to face, clearly calculating his options. This is highly irregular." "Life often is," Reverend Wilson said quietly. "The question is whether we choose to be guided by rules written on paper or those written on our hearts." Finally, Peterson's shoulders sagged slightly. "I'll need documentation. Adoption papers. Properly filed. I can't simply ignore my responsibilities." "We'll file whatever papers are necessary," Thomas promised quickly. "And I'll personally ensure they do," the Reverend added. "You have my word as a man of God." Peterson glanced at the determined faces surrounding him and nodded curtly. "Very. Well, I'll return in 3 months to verify the paperwork is in order. If not..." He left the threat unspoken. As the agent and sheriff departed, the tension in the yard gradually dissipated. Martha sagged against Thomas, relief washing over her. "Thank you," Thomas said to the assembled neighbors. "We never expected." "Neighbors look out for each other," Mrs. Johnson said simply, "even when they're about to become former neighbors." Inside the house, Martha hurried to the cellar, calling softly for Najoni. The girl emerged, blinking in the light, her face anxious until she saw Martha's smile. "It's all right," Martha assured her. "Everything's going to be all right now." That evening, as the sun set over the plains they would soon leave behind, the Millers sat on their porch steps, Thomas, Martha, and between them, Najoni. The wagon stood ready in the yard, packed for their journey west. "Are we still leaving tomorrow?" Najoni asked, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Thomas nodded. "Yes, but not because we're running away. Because we're moving. Towards something better. A new beginning," Martha added, her arm around the child's shoulders. "For all of us." Najoni leaned against Martha, her small hand finding Thomas's larger one. "My grandmother said that families aren't just made by blood, they're made by love." Martha met Thomas's gaze over the girl's head, seeing in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart. The storm that had brought this child to their door had washed away years of pain and doubt, revealing the path they were meant to follow all along. "Your grandmother was right," Thomas said softly. "And we have a lot of love to give." As night settled fully around them, the 3 figures remained on the porch, their silhouettes merging into one against the backdrop of stars, a family forged not by blood or birth, but by the kind of love that defies boundaries, overcomes prejudice, and transforms lives. Their journey west would begin with the morning sun, but their journey as a family had already begun. On a stormy night when an Apache girl knocked on their door,